would like to introduce our speakers today. Dr. Lomika Anderson is an associate professor of French, and Dr. Duquette is an assistant professor of German. They're going to talk to you today about innovative ways to use wikis, blogs, and podcasts in your classroom. So let's please welcome them.
Thanks everyone for coming out this afternoon, especially with the weather. We have a lot to cover in 1 hour. We're going to talk about blogs, wikis, and podcasting and some of their potential uses in the classroom. And I just wanted to say up front that we teach French and German, so a lot of our examples will be examples that we have done in the classroom based on our experiences or things that we have seen. But that said, I think that you can probably think about those things and about ways that you can actually use them in classes that you are teaching. What we thought we'd do, because we have an hour that we are faced with as far as time, is if you have any brief clarification questions, we could take those after each topic. We're going to start with blogs and then go to wikis and then podcasting. So if you have any really quick clarification questions, we could tackle those right after we cover each topic. But then other discussion and other questions you might have, we can leave for the last 15 minutes of question and answer at the end. So that's kind of our plan that we wanted to work with. And again, our focus today is not on the technical aspects of blogs, podcasts, and wikis, although we can certainly offer some advice at the end if some of you have questions on things that we've used or have experiences with other things. And we're also going to make sure the PowerPoint is on the website after, so if you want to go back and look at something, we have some different links, URLs that we have incorporated into the PowerPoint with some examples. You'll be able to consult those after. So we're pretty much starting out with the basics on this because we don't know what your experience is in terms of thinking about blogs and podcasts and wikis. Some of you may have very little experience. Others of you may have much more experience. So we're going to start out with the basics. And the first topic is going to be blogs. So basically, what is a blog? If we think about it, very simply put, it's a website that can be updated, and it's often displayed in reverse chronological order. And many people think, okay, well, what does this actually look like? And the next slide will show you kind of an example of what a blog looks like. And you can see this one is primarily text-based, and you can see the date. This one happened to be taken from the 6th of April, and the time is there, so everything is logged for you. Okay, so what can you find in a blog? Typically, there's a title for a post. There's text, there could be pictures, video, audio, links. Often we'll see a blog functioning as a personal diary or some sort of a news journal. We'll see a lot of reflecting going on, critical thinking, perhaps comments on a particular subject. And again, these are dated, so you can go back and it archives nicely the blog for you. I think probably the most common type of blog is the text-based blog. And there are some other types of blogs that are a little bit different, and the one that you saw earlier in the picture was a typical example of a text-based blog. But a photo log, for example, is a little bit different, and that's where we see the photograph as the medium, okay, what's being communicated. And maybe we could just go to one of those links at the top, or it doesn't really matter which one, but here's Life in Stuttgart, and we see the primary thing that's being communicated here is the picture with a little bit of text that describes the picture. Okay, so I think if you think about this, these could be useful in certain types of classes where you want to focus more on the visual and have students imagine what's going on that surrounds the picture. The other thing that could be another different type of blog is a video blog. And in the video blog, and this happens to be someone who I think is over in Europe somewhere and talks about some of her experiences in different places. She happens to be traveling to Paris but knows no French, so she's talking about some of her experiences while she's there. So these can be used in different ways in the classroom as well because they include more of the sound and the video. And I don't know if we're able to play one of those or not very quickly, but just to give you an idea of what's happening, the video here is the key aspect of the blog rather than the text or the picture as we saw on the other one.
Everything in Paris is epic.
So this gives you an idea as to what you can find on a video blog. So it's kind of fun to think about uses and ways that we could incorporate some of these different types of blogs into a language class, and we'll get back to that a little bit later on. But let's think about for a minute why we might use a blog in class. Here's a few reasons. I think one thing that stands out to me in working with blogs and in my own language classes is kind of the sense of ownership that develops from the blogs. And the students, when they're actually keeping their own blogs, they're able to communicate with a real audience. So it's no longer between you and the student and the teacher, which is typical for a lot of assignments that we as teachers give out. But they're actually going beyond that, and their thoughts and pictures and text, they're out there for the world to see now. And other people can interact with them through comments, which is a really interesting feature of blogs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we show you an example of some of the projects we used. So you've got this sense of ownership and just publishing out there to a real audience and creating that possibility for interaction that doesn't always exist in the same way in the classroom. And so the community, the last thing up there, can be linked and cross-linked to form communities. I think that's important too, because students in your class can read what each other are saying, but also the outside world as well. So you can have this potential for interaction that's created. We wanted to just post a few ideas for using blogs, both for teachers and for students. And this could be teachers of really any level. You can post things such as materials and resources. You can use it basically to house your course, like a syllabus and that kind of thing. That's one option. That may not be the best or most pedagogical option, but it's certainly a possibility. When you get down to things like sharing and discussing your lesson plans, there you're bringing in more of the interactive aspect of blogs where you're allowing for comments and discussion. For students, on the other hand, I think that some of the most interesting uses are using it for a journal, whether they're maintaining a journal, a personal journal, individual journal, or even as a class. Because it does allow, as we have up there, for discussion to continue outside of class and with other people who aren't actually part of the classroom community. One thing that we are asked a lot is, how do we find really good blogs to use when we're teaching? And this is a tricky question, and we'll offer a few more comments later on. But one resource that I think that we'd encourage you to start with is using a directory. For us, sometimes we go to specific directories that are created for language, that are language specific. But we have up here just a list of some general directories that you can go to look for different types of blogs. So if you type in something like history or gardening, you could find things that are related to those. And we could maybe show one example of what this looks like. Okay, so you can see they actually list some categories for you. And you can see if what you're looking for might fall into one of those categories and then go from there. But it does take some time to work out. And as I mentioned, this will come up in one of our projects, because it did take us some time to find these for language-specific projects that we're working on. The next thing that we'll just mention very briefly is host, where you can go to get an account to set up a blog. And some of you may be very new to blogs or have never used them before. And a couple of these we could recommend that we've actually used. We've used Blogger.com, WordPress, EduBlogs, and we've heard good things about the last one, ClassBlogmeister.com. EduBlogs offers a lot of security features. It's specific to educators, and I think many teachers end up using that because of some of the features that it offers. Personally, I've been very happy with Blogger.com and WordPress. EduBlogs, I found from time to time that the site's down or it's a little slow, but I think that the security that it offers is probably something worth considering.
Blackboard also has a blogging feature on it now as well, so you could, if you want, you could just stick with Blackboard and have your students keep their blogs on Blackboard.
Yeah, so there are lots of things that are available. I think it's just mainly a question of finding something that works well for you and that offers the features that you're most interested in. Okay, we're now going to talk about a couple of blog projects that we've used with our students in class. And again, I mentioned at the beginning that our examples are language specific, but I think you can think about ways that they might be applied to classes that you're teaching. And the first, we kind of did a year-long project with blogs. And the first semester, so in the fall semester, we had the students acting as blog readers. So their assignment was simply to go and read some different blogs and then respond appropriately. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. And that continued in the second semester when we had the students acting as blog writers. So once they had that experience figuring out what a blog was, kind of why some blogs are more successful than others, what makes a good blog, they were able to go and actually maintain their own blog. So for the first project, they're reading blogs. And how we set this project up was that we had students, we actually came up with 3 or 4 blogs in the target language that we thought might be appropriate for students to go and look at. And we had students visit each one of these blogs and basically respond to some different questions about the blog. Things like what was going on, what was the blogger talking about on that particular week, some new vocabulary words that they learned. And keep in mind that this is for foreign language, so we were really working on targeting reading comprehension. So when we had our students follow these blogs, they would follow one for each week for a 3-week period. And then at the end of that 3-week period, they decided which one they were most interested in. For the French ones, I had one blog that was very personal. It was written by a French lady who was living in Quebec. And she was probably in her early 20s, so kind of close in age to my students. And I think some of the students, especially some of the female students in my class, could relate to her very easily. I had another blog where it was a news-related blog. So those who were interested in what was going on in news all over the world could visit that. And it was actually kept by a man who was living in California, a French man. And the final blog was one that dealt with political issues that were going on. So there were 3 different types of interests there that they could kind of choose from at the end of that 3-week period, and then they decided to follow one for the rest of the semester. And over the course of the semester, they continued to complete regular worksheets related to what was going on, what the blogger was talking about, and really got to know the blogger pretty well over the course of the semester, and were encouraged to even communicate through comments with the blogger. And quite a few of them did, and they were really excited when they got responses back. Oh, you're following this blog as part of your class. And one of their projects at the end of the semester was to present kind of a summary of some of the topics that were going on in this blog, and then to present a little bit more about the blogger themselves. What could they find out about this person who was keeping the blog? Things that would go beyond just their age, profession, that kind of thing. What were some of their interests? Why did they relate well to this person? So that was what was going on during the first semester. And I mentioned that we'd get back to this a little bit later. And when we were talking just a few minutes ago about deciding on blogs to read, finding good blogs to use in the classroom, we mentioned about going to a directory and looking for different categories. I think that what we did prior to the fall semester is we on our own time, we tried to find a couple of different blogs that were maintained by native speakers, and we followed them over a period of probably about 2 months to make sure they were appropriate, to make sure they were being updated regularly. Because one of the things is, that can happen is a blogger creates a blog and it's really cool, really good, but then they don't update it. And so if that happens mid-semester, you're kind of stuck with your students. Well, this blogger stopped updating the blog, or they decided to go on vacation, or whatever, something happened. And so you have to kind of think about those things. So if you're able to follow the blog for a period of time beforehand to see, is this a blog that might be appropriate for the class, that's definitely a good thing. So this is basically how we decided on the different blogs. We thought about what topics we wanted, we visited the blogs, and then found ones that are appropriate and made sure that they were being maintained for a period of time. So that was during the fall, and then in the spring semester, I mentioned that the students then became blog writers. So they had the fall to really get a good idea as to what was going on in some of the native speaker blogs that they visited. And in the spring, we had them basically maintain a blog in order to either prepare for discussion in class on different topics that we were covering, or extend discussion beyond the classroom. Some of the topics that we covered in one of the two classes, either French or German, included things like friendship, terrorism, discrimination, racism, and the list goes on and on. There are lots of different things that came up. So that's what they were being asked to do, is just to maintain their blog, to make a post every week to their blog, and they were encouraged to incorporate things like a picture to kind of go with whatever they were talking about, and a link that was related to the topic. And then they were also required to comment to each other's blogs. But what we told them we were looking for in their posting were a few things. One is critical reflection, kind of the depth of thought, the examples. And I think the examples turned out to be a really interesting thing, because we wanted them to get personal with their blogs, and they ended up doing a really good job at this. Things would come out in their blogs that I don't think they would have ever mentioned in class. And so it was a good way for them to get to know each other, and for us to get to know them a little bit better as well. And we'll show you a couple examples. We have one for French and one for German. And this one for French, they're talking about the problem of losing trees in the forest. And she talks about this, first of all, presents what the problem is, talks about possible solutions, gives her own personal take on it, and gives an example. You'll see a link at the bottom that she's incorporated. So that gives you an example of one in French, and there's also one in German. This particular student, his cousin, happened to be in Iraq and got a piece of shrapnel stuck in his ankle, and talks about a personal story related to that. So those are some examples of what the students did in both the language-specific projects. What we were looking for as part of assessment, because I think as teachers, assessment is always an important thing. How are we going to grade the students? We were looking for different things: content, coherency, organization, creativity, accuracy. And then we were also looking for, in their comments that they made to each other, they were required to do 3. So they had to at least visit 3 other students and comment. Some of them would visit more. But we wanted to make sure they were actually reading them and responding. So was the content there? And then we wanted them to use discourse strategies to help in just getting to use those a little bit more, like I agree with you that, I think that, I like that, those kinds of things. And remember, this is language specific, so we're targeting that for the purpose of continuing learning of French and German. So that was an example of one project that we did as far as blogs go. We've continued to use blogs in different ways since we did that, and actually incorporating them with podcasts, and you'll see that a little bit later on in the presentation. But next we're going to move to Wikis. I mentioned before we had a lot to cover, so I hope that it won't seem like we're going too quickly over these. But were there any clarification questions that you wanted to ask on blogs before we move into Wikis? I think I mentioned at the beginning that if there's something that wasn't clear, we can address it and then go back to more discussion at the end.
How many students did you have in a class?
I I had between 10 and 12 students, and and they were both intermediate classes in French and German. Okay, we'll jump right into wikis next. All right, so for some of you, wikis may be new. For some of you, they may not be. But we're kind of going from ground zero here. I think one of the most interesting aspects about wikis is that they're collaborative. And that's a big difference from the wiki and the blog. And Laura will talk about that in a slide in just a few minutes. But it's interesting because anyone can go and edit content on the wiki page. And probably one of the best examples of wiki is the Wikipedia. So as I mentioned, anyone can contribute, anyone can change things, anyone can delete, anyone can add, but there are certain limitations. You want to keep going? Okay, even the next one. So the administrators do have some control over content, and you can set that up depending on what type of wiki that you're using. In this one, they're giving a warning. So they say the next time you deliberately introduce incorrect information, you'll be blocked from editing. And that's just one example. So when you're editing a wiki, there's often a login, although it's not required for all of them. But I found that it's good to do for students if you're using this in class. You basically just type in your text as you're typing in a Word document and save your changes. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So it's very simple to use. Some different wiki hosts that are out there, we put up on the PowerPoint. We both have used in the past the wikispaces.com. And I've had good experiences with them. I haven't actually used some of the other ones, but there are other ones out there. But what we really wanted to talk about today are some of the different ways that you can use wikis in education. And we're going to show you some examples of these. I'm going to start out by talking about the Micropedia. And basically, this project has students creating a mini encyclopedia of some sort. And I'm doing this project this semester in an intermediate French class, and the students have been reading a book on racism. And essentially what I have them doing is working in groups, so they're working in teams as part of their wiki. And I have them, I have each group assigned to look at and develop certain words or concepts that are in the book, in chapters. So what you see here is just the first page kind of my wiki when you go there. And I ask all the students just to introduce themselves just very briefly on the first page. So for other people who are outside the class reading this, they get an idea, a feel for who the students are. What the students have to do, and before I go into that, I'll just tell you how I kind of got the idea to structure this. There's actually, if you go to details of the project, there is the one right above it, the history. There's a history class that was doing kind of the same type of project. So I went out there and looked around and found an interesting project and thought, how can I adapt this to French? So this shows you an idea. If you find something interesting, there's always ways that you can go and adapt things. And they kind of go through and define different historical elements based on a book they're reading that's related to the topic, beginning of World War I to the Cold War. So if we'll go back to our wiki really quick, you can explore that from the links later on if you're interested. But what I wanted the students to do, and what I asked them to do, was for each word or concept that I gave them for the different sections of the book, I wanted them to provide a short definition of the word. But I wanted them to define it not only with text, but also with visuals. So I suggested that they find interesting pictures or embed video or something that would make it a little more interesting and really take advantage of the technology. The other thing I asked them to do was to incorporate a personal story into their definition, so how they can relate to a specific idea or concept personally, and then add a discussion question at the end. And I just want to show you back at our site, if we could go to section 2. Okay, here, the first topic, the first word or concept that these students were defining was racism, and one of the very basics of the book. And if you go down to the video, one of the students found a video that was really nicely related to the topic, a video by a French group. So it's in French, and it talks about how there are no colors that exist, really targeting the topic of racism. And then the personal example that's right below that talks about how the student was when she was in elementary school. She really had no idea that racism existed until later on when she was introduced to it through some different incidents and things like that. So that's an interesting example. And also if you could go to section 4 and click on discrimination. This entry shows an image rather than a video that was included as part of the definition. And the personal story that goes along with this particular student is talking about, he has parents, one parent is Indian and the other is Canadian. And talks about an incident of discrimination that he faced with his parents when he was small, when they entered a gas station, and this was many, many years ago, but the attendant working at the gas station actually turned the close sign when he saw them come in and would not give them any gas. And so it's interesting because these types of things, again, like we saw in the blogs, don't really come up in class. They're not things that the students would likely share, but they do come up in some of the posts and some of the personal stories that they include online. And before we leave the wiki, I just wanted to show you, if we can go back to the wiki one more time, I wanted to show you kind of what we have going on. If you go to any section, really. Actually, go to section 2 might be a better one, just because everything's there. We're currently working on the last part of the book right now. But on the top, you'll see tabs, and you'll see the first tab says page, and that's where we're at. The second one is discussion. And what discussion does is actually shows you the discussion board, the discussion forum that exists. And what I have each group doing is giving feedback to the other groups. Okay, I also have a native speaker who works with me who's giving feedback to the groups as well. And I give them feedback. So they're getting a lot of feedback. They're also posting their questions for discussion that, that they came up with for a particular concept or word here, and other people are interacting with them, which is interesting. If you go to the history page, which is the next tab, you'll see who did what when, which is really, really beneficial for us as teachers, because you can make sure the students are doing what you ask them to do. You know who's doing what, when they did it, and you can actually see in the green highlighted area the text that was inserted and the text that was deleted. So you can go down and figure out what revisions were made to a particular entry. So that's an interesting feature of this. So if you're giving a group grade, you can also take into account individuals and how they participated in the wiki as well. Okay, I think that's where I stop and let Laura take over. So we'll do a quick change of the microphone.
Okay. So some more examples for wiki options is, another one is a branching story. Do you remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books? Did you read them, or maybe kids read? I really liked the Choose Your Own Adventure. But you can have your students make their own Choose Adventure books. So you can start with one page and branch off from that page and have different people add different endings, different events to the story. So if you're in an English class, maybe you could have it come from something you're reading, or even a history class. I think that would work. So this is just an example. So they have two options there that they can choose from the story there. And you can have it branch off as many times as you want. You can start with a big group and then have groups kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller if you want to. So that's one option. Another option is a project that I'm doing right now, which would be sort of like glossing a text. In my class, we're going to be reading a novel about former East Germany, And there are a lot of terms in this book that they will have never heard about, like what did the wall look like? What were some of the events that were celebrated in the former East that are no longer celebrated? So I chose a lot of these topics from the book before we read it. Students are now researching these topics and putting these all on their wiki page so that before they read the book, they'll have background knowledge about these topics and ultimately be able to understand the book better. So here's an example. This is also in progress. They've done a bibliography, an outline, and their first draft. So click on what's on that one. So this is the first one. They've got their first draft. I told them in this first draft not to worry about any pictures or stylistics, only focus on content, because I thought if they start worrying about pictures, they'll forget about the content. So that's why this isn't very pretty yet, because they're just working on their content. And I'm also working with another class, another German class at the University of Tennessee, because I have 10 students in my class. With only 10 students, I could only do, if I wanted to be in groups, I could only do a certain amount of topics. So in order to expand the topics, you can see I think there are 10 different topics there. My students are doing 3 topics, and her students are doing the rest. We're also doing peer editing on each other's pages. So this way they get feedback from more people, and they also, at the end, will have access to more information than they would have had if they were only working with people in their class. So that's a nice thing about doing something on the internet, is that you can open it, like Laura was saying, to more than just your class. And that's one thing about Blackboard. Blackboard is great because it's an easy tool that we all have here. But if you did want to do something where you opened it to another class, or you wanted other people from outside the USC community to look at what your students are doing, that's one challenge with Blackboard. Okay. And a couple other ideas, you could have your students do a dictionary wiki, you could have them define terms, you could decide on the terms, you could have them, if you're reading, and I think this could work for really almost any discipline. I could see it working in sciences, or, and you give them the terms, or they decide on the terms and somehow define them. A travel phrase book is another option that they could, you know, you're going somewhere for one of your projects and you want them to think about where they're going. Okay. So just briefly, we gave you a list of some wiki hosts that you could use if you're interested in doing this. You just have to get an account with them, get your students to get an account there, and that's it. It's really easy to set up an account. So to sort of recap the differences between blogs and wikis, the main thing, blogs are more individual and wikis are collaborative. If I have a blog, it's my blog. I post to it. You can comment to it, but your comments won't be as visible. So it's more of a reflective outlet for students. They can use it as a journal. We've also done projects where we've had group blogs, but I think that the project that we did where we had individual blogs worked best in terms of student reflection and sharing. They said a lot more. They changed the background of their blog. They felt more ownership over it. When we've had them post to their group blog, they post what they have to post, and that's it. So it's a different sort of purpose. With wikis, the nature of wikis is collaborative. You wouldn't have a wiki just for one person. So the point of a wiki is if you want to do a group project and have it so that all the students can contribute, add to, take away, and the discussion board is a nice function because you can do peer editing. It's also a place for students to, if they want to talk about their project together, they can do all of that on their discussion board, and then it's all there for them. They don't have to, oh, I lost that email. Did you get my email? It can all be right there on the discussion board linked to the wiki. So it just depends on what your purpose is, whether you might want to use a blog or a wiki. So that's it for wikis, and then we'll move on to the last topic, podcasts. Does anyone have any quick questions about wikis? And we'll have time at the end, too, if anything else occurs to you. Okay, podcasts. Just briefly again, what is a podcast? You've probably heard on the radio, you hear sometimes, and this, you can listen to this podcast. Just go to the website and click here. It's basically a radio program that you can listen to whenever you want to. You can subscribe to it. It automatically downloads to your computer. You can listen to it on your computer, or if you have an MP3 player, you can have it automatically, when you plug that into your computer, it automatically downloads to that, and you can take it with you when you're walking from your car in the morning or when you go to the gym, and you can listen to This American Life or whatever program it is you like whenever you want. So it puts radio in the hands of the consumer, and you can listen whenever you want to. Okay, so some of these things I mentioned, why it's attractive to use podcasting. It's up to date, it's in your own hands. And for the person producing it, which could be you or your students, it's an interesting way to be creative. So some ideas for maybe how you could use podcasting in your classes. These are mostly ideas for your students to be developing them, but remember, you could develop them for your students, or you could find podcasts online that you want your students to listen to as well, just like with the blogs. So here are a few ideas you can see. I think one interesting option is conducting an interview. If students can get access to a digital recorder that they can take away from class and interact with someone they wouldn't normally be able to interact with, and then bring that back and share that with the rest of their class. I think that's a really interesting use of podcasting. Or for study abroad, there are lots of options, I think, too, with interviews or recording different things that they hear around them. Okay, some services for making podcasts. So if you want to have your students record, these are some free services online that you can use to have your students record. Laura and I have used Odeo, Evoca, and Audacity. Audacity is something that you have to download onto your computer, whereas Odeo and Evoca are not. You just need an account within those. Sometimes we've had sort of varying experiences. With Evoca, students have to have an account. So they may come to you and say, well, I forgot my password for Evoca. Do you know it? Well, no, I don't know it because you made your account. One way to get around that is to tell them all your username is your last name and your password is German. And so you make sure everyone has the same password. That's one way to get around that. If students record, so in order to record using these, you need headphones and a microphone and a computer. And a lot of students even have that at home. So this is something they can do at home too, or they can go to the computer lab on campus. Once you've explained this to them and shown them in class one time, I don't think you need to use class time to do this anymore. But I would suggest devoting a little bit of time to it in class, because I don't think it's fair to just send students off and say, figure it out on your own. And even giving them instructions, sometimes doesn't totally work. But so they, from this, can make an MP3 file, which then they can upload to their blog in Blackboard if you want, if you're doing this just a class community. Or you could have them put it on one of those other blog sites that we showed you. Or if you want them to keep it in Odeo or Evoca, that's also possible. They can keep it in this online in one of those applications, if you just want them to listen to it. Okay, so this is basically what I talked about, what you'll need, and some tutorials that you can go back to and look at these if you want to see about how to record podcasts. So I'll talk about a couple an example project that we did that will maybe spark some ideas for you in your discipline. This was another blog project that we did as well, and the context for this was study abroad. We wanted our students to start thinking about study abroad, even students who maybe had never had any ideas of going abroad. So the first project they had to do was write their blog. So this is an example. Write about why they would be a good candidate for study abroad. And their podcast had to be an intercultural story that had happened to them in the U.S., or maybe if they'd been abroad before. And that's what they had to record themselves saying and share with the rest of their class. I was just going to say something. Oh, before doing this, we had listened to other podcasts in the target language, so students had an idea of what a podcast sounds like and what it contains. So, for example, most of them start out with music. So we wanted our students to incorporate some music in the background to make it a little bit more interesting, and then they would introduce themselves and tell whatever story it was they were going to tell. So I think this will work if we will just let you hear a second of it. So she put music at the beginning. It's even German music, which is nice. We found some German music.
Hallo, hier ist Chrissy. Ich war in Wittenberg dieses Sommer und ich hatte ein paar Probleme mit Reden mit die deutschen Leute. Zum Beispiel, ich habe ein Fahrrad gebraucht und mein Gastmutter hatte kein Fahrrad.
Don't end show. Okay. So you can tell that she is not even if you don't speak German, you can probably tell she's not reading what she's saying, which is good. We didn't want them to. We wanted this to be a way for them to practice just free speaking. So that's what she was doing. Some students, you can tell, are a little bit more planned, a little bit more reading what they wrote. It just depends on how comfortable they are speaking. But students said they felt like this was a really good way for them to speak without the pressure of their whole class looking at them. So you could re-record 100 times. No one would know until you get it to exactly where you want, if you want to put that time into it. So then, just like the blog project, we had classmates comment to the podcast. They had to write something in their podcast showing that they listened to it, because they could just write, "Great job, interesting," and then who knows what if they listened to it. So they had to do something in their podcast or in their comment to show that they listened to what they wrote. The second task for this project was to interview someone who had studied abroad. And they had to include a picture of that person, and then they had to include excerpts from the interviews on their blog. So that hopefully gave them a perspective of what it's really like to study abroad if they never had. And then, yeah.
And I guess I was going to add to that one that they thought the interview was a really interesting idea, but it was a little complicated for them in that they had to be with the person and figure out a way with the technology that we had available to them, which is basically just the computers in the lab, to do the interview. So they didn't. We don't have the resources in our lab that they all had their little iPods with their recording devices and could go around recording them. So they were pretty low tech with this and had to get the person into the lab, schedule a time, and then do the questions with the person as they came up. So they prepared the questions ahead of time and then interacted with the person during the interview. And then after they finished the interview, they had to expand a little bit more on their thoughts about stereotypes and things like that related to different things that they might encounter when studying abroad. So they liked this part of the project, but it was a little difficult from a technical standpoint.
It was their least favorite of the three. Because they also had to find someone who they could talk to in the target language. So they couldn't ask someone who'd studied not in France or not in a German-speaking country. But we helped them with that. We helped them find people they could talk to. And the last project they did, and they had comments again, the last project they did was pick a city where they might want to study abroad, research that city, and then put together an advertisement for that city because you want your friends to come visit you. So you want to make it sound really exciting so that your friends will want to come visit you in that city. Which seems like it could be Apple. I don't know if anyone here is from advertising, but it seems like you could do something like that to help people work on an advertising topic. And then again, they had to comment on that and maybe ask questions. And students were given extra credit if someone made a comment to their podcast. We didn't require them to comment to the comments because how many commenting to the commenting can you do? But we did want them to read the comments, because if you don't have to comment to the comment, then do I even care what someone commented to me? So we gave extra credit for people to respond to questions that people may have asked in the comments. And I would say about half the students took advantage of that, maybe about half the time. But it just was too cumbersome to try to have them comment to the comments all the time, because then it's time for the next assignment already. And then assessment, we looked at similar things as with the blogs, content, coherency. This time we added pronunciation, accuracy, creativity, impact, so is it interesting for your audience? And then they were graded on the comments that they left as well. So that was the podcasting section. So we were curious how you all maybe have used wikis, blogs, or podcasts in your classes. Maybe you could share some of your ideas, and also we'd be happy to answer any other questions you have about them.
One way I use a wiki is as an annotated bibliography. So the students have to find resources, and then they basically, end up at the end of the semester with a huge list of resources and annotated bibliography. A friend of mine in Indiana, at Indiana State University, uses Wikis, and she puts out information that is grammatically incorrect, and the students have to continue to edit until that paragraph is correct. And she said it almost becomes a competition. It's like, I found that one first.
What type of course is that for?
She teaches business report writing.
That's good. Well, why are you all here? What did you want to learn about blogs, wikis, and podcasts?
Well, how do I combine my own textbook with blog?
Well, with blogs.
Yeah.
Well, you could take topics from your textbooks and have students write about similar topics. So what would be a topic, for example, in your textbook?
Travel.
Okay, so you could have them even do something where they research a Chinese city and write about that city. The students' favorite podcasting project out of that one with those 3 different topics was the research a city one. I think they felt like they had more control over that topic because they could research it, they learned something about Germany or France, and then they could share that. So they all reported that they liked that one the best.
And if we go back to our slide on writing blogs, so they're using blogs as writers, the topics that we used were all topics that corresponded to chapters in our textbooks. And I think from this list, some of the topics that the students enjoyed the most were things like friendship, what is a friend to you, were more of the personal topics. Not to say that they didn't like the topics like terrorism, because I think they could find examples to relate to. But I think for your students, maybe, was it Heaven in the Afterlife or Confidant for Secrets that work really well?
Yeah, you learn a lot more about the student, and they share a lot more about themselves with those personal topics.
As airfares become more expensive, I'm really interested in finding ways for students to have more international collaboration who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And I'm interested in these possibilities, especially for linking classrooms at USC with classrooms in the Global South. And I was wondering about the possibilities of having students in classrooms in different countries, maybe jointly editing a wiki, or what experiences you know about that?
We have, well, I'm doing that wiki project with someone in Tennessee right now. We teach methods classes for future foreign language teachers, and we have had our students work with other students from Tennessee, the University of Florida, and then our 2 classes, so 4 different classes working together to put together a wiki about different topics in foreign language methodology. So there were, I guess, 4 people per group, 1 from each class. They each had a topic that they had to research, and by the end of this semester have basically a resource page for what do you do about teaching culture, for example. And then throughout the semester they would be visited by other groups on that discussion board and give peer editing advice. And so that's not another country, but I think it's the same idea. And as long as you give specific guidelines about when things are due, what is expected of the students, I think it could work really well. And also, if the teacher in the other place is a good partner.
I think another thing that we tend to see with projects where we involve classes from outside of USC is that on the discussion page for the wikis, there's a lot more going on, because I've just noticed that with the wiki I'm doing with my French students this semester, they put some things up there, but they do a lot of talking face-to-face. But communication, when you have these classes, we had a class, as Laura mentioned, from Tennessee and Florida that were interacting with 2 of our classes, you see a lot more going on, because that's often their primary means of communication is through that discussion board. Did you do this? Or, here's some formatting issues that we need to take care of. Who wants to be responsible for that? Or did you really understand the topic of, whatever happened to be the topic for that particular day that they were working on? And I think that it might be more related to this idea. So I think discussion boards can be a lot more interesting that way. As far as your question, I think that we have the only aspect
that we've done that has incorporated others from different countries, native speakers, is when we did the blog projects, we had native speakers comment sometimes on the blog entries and offer a different perspective, and that was interesting and motivating for the students. So whenever you have those opportunities, I would definitely take advantage of them and use them.
I had a student, for example, who wrote about fraternities, and he said, my parents want me to join a fraternity, but I don't know if I want to join one. I don't know what to do. And just a random German who I didn't know the person, but they happened upon his blog, and they wrote back, and they said, oh, we have something like fraternities too, and they're called this, but they're a little bit different than the ones there. So it was really interesting for him to, first of all, get a comment from someone, and then to see what he had to say.
Do you ever, I mean, I think it's interesting to give the students more time to have personal stuff, but does it ever get too personal? Like, do you ever have to?
Not that it's happened to me so far, but I mean, yeah, that could definitely be.
And you don't sort of say, you don't like, when you introduce the assignment, I mean, because I think of blogs as being.
Well, they may have their own, they have their own blogs, or they have their own MySpace more. I think MySpace is sort of replacing blogs now, but they'll probably put that stuff on MySpace or Facebook, yeah. But I observed someone teaching today, and he was asking his students about blogging, and he said, who has a blog? And one of the students said, oh, blogging, that's just, nobody does that anymore. So 2002.
We use Wikis, which is basically a collaborative effort. How would you grade each individual student's performance?
That's tricky. This semester, I'm grading, I graded the annotated bibliography that I did separately, because that was easy to see who put up what. But starting with the outline, I graded it 1 grade for everybody, which sometimes students really don't like. But I think if you wanted to grade it separately, but even with grading it together, I told them to tell me who did what part, just to make sure everyone was contributing equally. But if you wanted to, you could keep having them show you who did what and grade them all accordingly. But the reason I chose to grade them together is because I want them to think of this as a group project. I don't want them to think of this as I'm doing the history of the wall and you're doing the future of the wall. I want them to check over what each other have done and fix it. And already that unfortunately didn't happen. In one of them, a couple of the group members sort of misunderstood their topic and wrote something that was wrong, but they got 1 grade for it. And they may have been upset about that, but I'm hoping that they realize this is a group project, and the point of having the group is to sort of check over what each other are doing. So you could, I guess, decide what your goals are.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And when we were talking about the wiki projects, before we started them at the beginning of the semester, we thought, well, let's come up with a rubric that might work. And I have the rubric up here. We looked at content and consideration of the reader. So basically, what kind of content are they putting into the wikis? We looked at grammatical accuracy, which is important for language learning, vocabulary and idioms for the same reason, punctuation, spelling, presentation. Enhancements, I had this on, I don't know if you had that on yours or not, but
mine have to do images at least.
Images, sound, videos, links, have they included those things? And then a category for feedback and revisions. So are all members providing feedback? Are they contributing? Is everyone contributing to the revisions? Now, so far in the semester, we're about midway through, I would already go back and make some changes to this just because of what you brought up. And what Laura was saying with what she has found, and I've basically found the same thing, that oftentimes the groups are working very well together, but there are times when you have one individual who is a slacker or just not contributing his or her part to the wiki. And what do you do with that student? And so there are different options you can explore, but I might add another category or another part to the rubric and give an individual grade as well next time, because I can go back and find out very easily who's not contributing. It's not anything that's hidden in the wiki. But the one thing that I did do, I guess maybe 2 weeks ago, when I felt like they weren't collaborating as much as I wanted them to, is I took a little bit of time in class and I said, okay, let's meet with your groups right now. We'll go to the computer lab together, and I want you to work on doing some of the revisions together as a group.
And they did that, and that seemed to help a little bit. But then I'm not sure if that trend will continue for the last part of it. We haven't actually finished it yet, so I don't know. But I made time for them to collaborate, and I made them do it in class. So we'll see what happens, but that's a really good point.
One thing I was going to say is that maybe get them to grade themselves, you know, so that you
That's
get
a good idea.
you get the input of the group members about, and that kind of frightens people into doing things a little bit better.
And one thing that we, just to bring up the other thing that we have that's attached to the rubric is at the end of the project, each person has to submit a short summary email to us where they talk about how the different members of their group contributed and any concerns that we as the teachers should be aware of. So that's when some things can come out if there were specific problems that they encountered, if it was one person consistently who wasn't pulling his or her weight as far as the project, that we could know about that from them individually.
I'm wondering, with reflection and critical thinking, if you think that just having these tools and the nature of the students using the tools leads to that, or do you build things in to try to shape the experience or the assignment in the hope that it will lead to, on purpose, critical thinking and reflection?
I think you need to guide it. I think this tool lends itself, or blogs maybe lend themselves well to reflection, but if the task isn't set up in a way that encourages the students to reflect, then they won't do it. So you need to give them a specific prompt that encourages them to think about more than just describe your family. I mean, that's something you might do in a lower level language class, but you need to give them prompt questions that encourage them to go a little further.
And I think too, how we set up our blogs in the first project that we did, where they were acting as readers and then writers. When they were writers, we used the blog in two different ways. One was to kind of prepare them for class discussion, and the other was to extend class discussion. So if we were preparing them for discussion, our goal was more to get them to brainstorm ideas, things that we might talk about in class. But when we were extending discussion, we'd already talked about a topic in some detail in class. So they were taking, kind of synthesizing what we talked about and extending that further. And I think that that's when we would see a little more of that critical thought going on, because we've covered the topic in class, they had some time to think about it, explore it, and then write about it, reflect on it further as part of their blog that they were writing.
Excuse me. I know a professor that I know called some flack from students because he used a podcast as an instructional tool. Do you have any suggestions of how you could form a podcast to give it a more personal level with the students? Because they mostly complained that his podcast was just too bland, and this is how it was. And
so was it like in addition to a lecture, or?
Yeah, it was putting a computer together. Basically, it was just a podcast. He came in, this is your box, this is what's in it, put it in here, that's how it goes. And a lot of the students just said that it was impersonal, they didn't learn anything. It was just him putting it together. And
was it a video podcast?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It's like a personality.
Personality is one thing.
You mentioned one thing, and that was some music.
Yeah, he could try to, and maybe put this is try to divide it up, maybe put some breaks in so it's not just monotonous all the way throughout.
Or maybe invite someone to come and do this with him.
Yeah, that would be good.
Maybe a student or a special guest or something to give it a little more, I don't know, some sort of creative aspect.
I think sometimes what happens is what you just said. You said, did it enhance a lecture? That's what podcasts a lot of times are used for an addition or an expert or something, not just your lecture. Somehow enhance, not just repeat or replace is a key, I think.
And that's the key with technology, that it doesn't replace what you're doing in the classroom, it enhances it. And just by using technology doesn't mean that it will enhance it. You have to know how to use it and what will be most pedagogically advantageous to your students. So that's always, we probably should have started with that, but that's always what you have to think about.
So do your students know going in before they take the class that this is going to be an instructional strategy?
No.
Okay. I was just curious. If I was to spring this on a group of mechanical engineering students, which I'm now thinking about doing, with the what you call it, the Micropedia, would fit really well with the class that I've just been dreading coming back to teach, because I've taught it for 10 years and I've got to do something different.
I've never lost anyone as soon as I've introduced this. I don't introduce it on the first day, but I do introduce it before dropout. So they could, if they wanted, run away. But I think as long as you give them enough guidance and post all the instructions they need on Blackboard or wherever you might post everything, so that they can always go back to it and look at it again if they have forgotten what you said. And also, I think it is important, even though it's giving up a little class time, to all go together to the computer lab, have them log into the wiki, make their account, and go through everything together, make sure they can do it together. And then they don't resent it either. Because otherwise they might feel like, oh, you just sent me off by myself.
Extra work.
So, training is important, not just for you, but for the students. And the other thing I would mention that I think is really valuable is not to overdo or do too much of a good thing. Because the students sometimes get tired of something quickly, and they're like, oh, we have to do this again. So just to kind of think about, okay, are we going to spread this out over the semester, do it for a short time period, not to do too much of something.
So about what percentage of a grade would you recommend, or have you found works well?
I think we've done anywhere between...
Let me pick it. I mean, you talked about a variety of things. For example, the collaborative wiki thing.
That might be 15%.
Yeah, I would say it's probably between 10 and 20 that we've incorporated for different things. Podcasts, wikis, blogs. It's been anywhere from 10 to 20% of the class grade. Because we do other things in the class as well. That's just one aspect. But just another comment. I have had students who have really not enjoyed the technology. I didn't tell them about that either. Initially, they don't know that. And some of the students do struggle, and so you might have to work a little bit more with some of them who aren't as technologically proficient as others. But I've had some who have really, really enjoyed it and came into the class knowing nothing, and others who just left the class and said, I just really wouldn't like to do that again. And you have that. It's that way for a lot of different things.
And you can point out that these are skills that they will need in their lives too, that this isn't just something they need for their class. It's good to know what a wiki is or how to record yourself on a computer. So if you point out maybe that these are life skills too.
When you talk about recording yourself on a computer, what does someone need?
A microphone.
To be able to, just a microphone.
And then go to one of those websites like Evoca or Odeo,
okay.
And you log in, create an account for yourself, and then it'll come up, you'll see it says record, and you click and record, and then it saves the file, and then you have an MP3 file.
And if you want to do a video, like talking...
a video, then you would need a video recorder.
Okay.
And that's
one of those little eyeball cameras that sits on your computer.
Oh, yeah.
Would that work?
Some of them do record video, so that could work. Actually good.
But the podcasts are very easy, and when we talked about some of the different services that are available, like Odeo and Evoca, that are both web-based, and just you can go in and be using those things in just a matter of minutes. Audacity has a lot of other features that are more interesting from a technical standpoint, like recording multiple tracks. But they take a little more training.
And if you use a Macintosh computer, GarageBand is also a really good way to record if you have a Macintosh. And you can do music in the background and make it fade in and out, and you can do a lot more with that.
Would you recommend, though, if we're doing a podcast for the first time, to try to keep it simple? Go with the 3 S's, short, sweet, and simple.
Yeah, I mean, as with everything, yeah.
I think this would be a good time to end today's seminar. Please fill out the evaluation form. If you didn't get one when you came in, there's one over on the side. If you're watching this online, you can click the little link and fill out an evaluation format. That's how we know you watched the setup this fall. We appreciate it. And thank you very much for coming. If I could have a nice round of applause for the speakers. Thank you. That was, I was amazed at some of the stuff you're doing.